Hello and welcome back to another episode of our draft series, third to last individual quarterback episode today. We're going to be talking about Haynes King, quarterback out of Georgia Tech. King was a really highly touted recruit, started his career at Texas A&M and showed some promise, had a lot of people excited early on when he was playing, and then the whole program kind of fell apart there, right? Jimbo Fisher's tenure at Texas A&M was a disaster. King was kind of swept up in that as a guy that was not able to overcome a lot of the poor circumstances surrounding him at A&M and eventually found a fresh start at Georgia Tech where he had a ton of success. This was a perfect storm for King after being in a terrible environment. I would say the environment he was in at Georgia Tech perfectly fit his scheme. Brent Key is a guy that develops offensive linemen at a really high level. And you see that when you watch Georgia Tech's offense. They had a ton of success this year. We're a team that probably punched above their weight for most of the season, won a lot of games that against teams that might have been more talented than them. And then you also have offensive coordinator Buster Faulkner, who's now going to be at Florida next season, who's a really creative guy and will fit his scheme to the traits of his players. And Haynes King greatly benefited from that. And we'll talk about why that was the case once we get into Haynes King as a prospect. King is very talented in some ways and is a limited player in other ways, but Georgia Tech was able to build their offense in a way that his weaknesses never really had to be dealt with. They were able to put together a really creative scheme that allowed him to maximize his ability and allowed him to have a great season. King was signed by the Panthers after the draft and should get an opportunity to compete for a backup job there. But let's get into King as a prospect. The first thing you notice with King, if you watch more than a quarter of football, is this is a really tough player. They ask him to run in between the tackles all the time. It was a huge part of their short yardage run game. They would like to run a lot of fakes, jet motions, things like that, and pull offensive linemen to create a window for King to just fly through the offensive line. And a lot of times he's taking on really tough contact at the second level and winning that fight and falling forward for another yard or two. There were a ton of games where the amount of times they asked him to carry the ball was, somewhat unrealistic, and yet he still managed it and dealt with injuries throughout his time at Georgia Tech, but for the most part was able to play through them and still be a really productive player. King moves pretty well. He was always kind of touted as a guy that was pretty athletic coming out of high school, and he's a really talented runner. He has good vision as a runner. He's pretty quick. He's got some power to him. He's maybe not a special athlete at the quarterback position. He's not as explosive as a Lamar. He's not as physical as a Josh Allen, but he's a good running quarterback. He has a clear strength there in his game. King is also, like, that toughness, I think, translates to his overall mentality as a player. He doesn't give up when pressure comes. He's looking to make a play. He's going to try to fight through contact and escape a sack. You see that mentality throughout his entire game. King, as a passer, on the other hand, is where you start to have some more questions. It's not a complete lost cause. Otherwise, he wouldn't be even having the chance to make an NFL roster. But there are a lot more limitations in that portion of his game. But we'll again continue with the positive first. King is pretty good in the short game. He has good zip on throws where he's able to set his feet and fire. He's accurate on screens and on orbit motions, all of those plays that Georgia Tech liked to kind of pair with their run game as, different looks that they could get to out of those types of plays to get their guys in open space. King operates that stuff pretty well. He delivers the ball on time. He delivers it accurately. You can tell he's well in tune with the offense there. And he also has a pretty quick release. So he's got an awkward throwing motion. We'll get to that, but he's able to get the ball out quickly enough in the short game for that to be a pretty good strength for him. So the rushing, the short game, that's the strength. Now let's get to some of the concerns with King, and I think it's pretty obvious where we're heading at this point. First of all, he does have a really awkward throwing motion. He holds the ball really far away from his head. He's just kind of got a longer... it's not necessarily slow. It's just kind of an extension of his arm. And there are times where if he's facing pressure or trying to get a throw down the field, it creates problems. You don't see it create a ton of issues on his tape, but it is something that's it looks a lot different than most of the guys you watch. In addition to the throwing motion or where he positions his arm, he also plays with a super wide base in the pocket, which one does kind of shorten you, right? Like the further spread apart your legs are, the less height you have, the harder it is to get the ball over those defensive linemen. It also just means that he needs more space to operate, right? Like if his feet are feeling like he's getting pressed up on, he's more likely to try to escape the pocket and feel that pressure coming. But the biggest concern with King, there's really two main features here, and they kind of go hand in hand. It's all of the intermediate to deep passing. It's just not great. He's a very inaccurate deep ball thrower. I would say even in the intermediate area, you see a lot of inconsistencies there and has some really bad misses. It's not just, a little bit off here, a little bit off there. He's just not a super talented thrower to that portion of the field, at least from an NFL level. Georgia Tech's able to kind of scheme up some shot plays where he's able to make those plays happen. But even then, guys a lot of times are having to slow down to catch the ball, or he's not leading them in the perfect direction to create more yards after catch. So even on the successful plays on Georgia Tech's film, you can see some limitations there. I also just think he struggles to really read out like pure passing progressions. This wasn't really a huge problem in Georgia Tech's offense because they're able to run so much kind of gadget stuff, plays where a tight end is leaking out and, pretty open, or, just less plays where you're really reading out from like 1 to 2 to 3. But I do think when he's asked to do that, he struggles and just doesn't always see the field super well. And overall, when you combine like the intermediate and deep accuracy concerns with questions about his ability to progress through a play from a 3rd and 10, you drop back and make a play, and like big NFL quarterback type stuff, there's a lot of questions there for me, and that is the place where it's hardest to buy in to his tape. The other concern, and I mean this is something we talked about earlier, is a positive, his toughness. He takes a ton of contact. He gets hit consistently. It caused him to be hurt in college. It will continue to happen in the NFL if he continues to play in this way. And the problem with this is he kind of has to play this way to be successful. Like, this isn't a guy that can just dial that back and be effective. Like the battering ram, short yardage running is a big part of his game. And so I think he'll continue to do that if he does get the chance to play at the next level, but he's going to get hurt. It's going to be a part of his game. All right, that gives us an overall summary of his game. Let's move in now to some clips and focus more on some individual plays here that I think kind of reveal some of the different issues that we've talked about with Haynes King. Let's look at this first play. This is a good example of some of the throwing motion mechanical concerns along with some of the processing issues. So here, first of all, you can see here what I'm talking about with the wide stance. Like right here, he's got a super clean pocket. This play's blocked up really well. It's only a 3-man rush. So he's got this block. Like he's fine here, but you can see, I mean, his legs are very spread apart. You can see like how much bent his front leg is compared to a lot of guys. You do see this affect him at times on tape. Here, I think ideally, he comes to this tight end first. They've kind of leaked this tight end out. They're trying to get him to come across the formation. I think here, if he just sticks on this for another beat, he's got him. But he doesn't, right? He gets over to the backside, in my opinion, a little early. But I also think he has this throw. If he would just pin this, right over the linebacker's left ear, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for him to get to this throw, but he eats this one too, right? And then just kind of gets a short gain with his feet. There are a lot of times where he just doesn't necessarily take what's there from a passing perspective and ends up having to use his legs. He can make this work in college, but at the NFL level, this just isn't going to work. All right, next clip here, again against Colorado. This is an example of where he is really effective in the RPO game. So they're going to run a little fake here, and then he's got the opportunity, if this edge crashes, to keep this and get out the backside. At this point, King's got a guy in space here, and he's able to, again, be creative in this case. He fakes the throw out to the receiver, gets that guy to take one false step, and now he's got daylight, and he's quick enough where he can get upfield and get a pretty solid gain out of this play. This is an example of where you see his biggest strengths. He's a creative player. He's athletic enough where he can beat guys in space and pick up yardage like that, and there he actually does get down and avoids the contact. So that you see the rushing ability there. Last clip here, and I think this is one of the plays that scares me the most about him at the next level. In this, Colorado, I believe, is in cover one robber. So this deep safety is covering anything deep over the field. You've got this dropping linebacker. It looks like everywhere else they're in man. Now, Colorado's playing pretty far off here, and Georgia Tech is trying to run rub routes on both sides of the field. So this receiver up here is picking this DB who's trying to guard this receiver. They get this look inside. And then on the other side, you've got this inside receiver here, Stockton, who I actually think is transferring to Florida this year. Stockton's job is to just put this linebacker in conflict and allow the running back to get a clear wheel route release up the field. So basically your main reads here with Colorado in man on this play are you either come back to this, this little in route, 5-yard in, and you hope to get some yards after the catch, or you hit the wheel. To me, against cover one, when you've got both of your zone defenders are in the middle of the field, the answer here to me is clearly that you've got a huge explosive play if you take this wheel route. I mean, Stockton runs a great pick here. You've got a ton of space to get this up to the running back. Instead, I mean, he does identify a guy who's somewhat open, but this zone defender is perfectly ready to cover this route across the field. Even though the man defender got put in conflict, there's nothing here. If King takes this ball and instead of trying to get this across the middle, he throws this wheel route up down the sideline, this could be a huge gain for Georgia Tech. So there's just plays like that where the processing isn't necessarily where you would like it to be. And I do have concerns about how that will translate to the NFL level. So that does it for the clips for Haynes King. Again, some cool plays, some good upside from a rushing perspective, but some concerns in how he plays from the pocket. So let's get into comps, and then I'll finish with my grade. My best case for Haynes King as a full, peak of his powers player is a guy that played this past season as a rookie. I don't think this is a perfect comp, but I think play style would be very similar. So I think it's probably the best way to translate it. I think Haynes King's absolute best case would be a less athletic version of rookie Jackson Dart. A guy that was able to put up some decent numbers in kind of a gimmicky offense, but you still have questions about, how does this translate? Can you continue to run this type of offense where you're not asking him to do a ton from the pocket for multiple years? And obviously Dart's just a much better athlete. He's bigger. He's more athletic. I think that's one of the things I probably underrated about Dart was his athleticism coming out. King is a good athlete, but he's not on that level. But I do think they win in similar ways. The processing and the accuracy aren't elite, although Dart, I think, showed more of that as a rookie than you see on King's tape. But they do have the ability to kind of serve as that battering ram as a rusher and get some production out of the offense that way and, keep the offense afloat through some scrambling. As a worst case for Haynes King, I put Max Duggan, just a guy that was a really scrappy player in college, had a lot of success at the collegiate level. He even made the national championship game with TCU, but just doesn't necessarily have the athletic tools to rely on that at the NFL level and was never a good enough thrower for that to fully translate. So that's a worst case. Again, if his worst case is he's out of the league, right? That's the possibility here with King. I do have an undrafted free agent grade on King. I just can't get there enough with the throwing to feel confident enough that the rushing can serve as a complement. I think he would really have to be a primary runner at the NFL level, and you just have to be such a good athlete to make that work that I have a hard time seeing a path to success for him. I do think maybe he could come in as a backup, second, third string, and not completely tank your offense, but I have a hard time seeing any sort of real success for him at the NFL level. So that does it for the Haynes King breakdown. We'll have a couple more of these coming up left with a couple quarterbacks that actually were drafted. So Kalamakis out of Rutgers, and then Baron Morton out of Texas Tech are the last two guys we're going to hit, and then hopefully circle back around for a little bit of a recap. So that is it for this episode. We'll catch y'all soon.